The great Britain, Sir Winston Churchill, once described Russia as a riddle, wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. No wonder, in a country that spans over 11 time zones. And where it takes a whole week by train to travel from Russia's capital, Moscow, to Vladivostok on the Pacific. It's hard to capture the vastness of Russia. From the volcanoes and the brown bears on Kamchatka, to the onion domes around Moscow. From the Arctic port of Sabeta and the icebreakers in the Polar Sea, to the mouth of the River Amur. From the Pacific coast, with its orcas and whales, to the glaciers at Europe's highest peak, Mount Elbrus, and the palm trees in Sochi on the Black Sea. Russia is full of secrets and mysteries, from the mountains in Dagestan to the oil platform in the Caspian Sea and to the swans in the unrivaled Volga Delta. It's summer on the bird island of Kolgoyev. The island in the Barents Sea is one of the most popular breeding grounds for geese. Here, in the Arctic Circle, rivers and swamps are ice-free for the next 3 months. But now it's time to go. Barnacle geese are now drawn to warmer areas. They spend the winter in Germany and Holland. It might sound strange, but for these geese, the North Sea is their inner south. Flying over Narian Mar, which is isolated on the Barents Sea, the birds continue south. Some of them make it quickly to St. Petersburg. Others take the eastern route, passing over the little town of Olonets on Lake Ladoga. Lake Ladoga, just east of St. Petersburg, is the largest lake in Europe. It feels more like a sea. In this animation, based on real data from GPS transmitters, you see the geese route over the Baltic Sea to Germany. Further east, in blue, you can see the routes of the hooper swans which migrate from the Arctic coast in Yamal, over the tundra and the taiga of Siberia to the deep south of Russia. Pelicans, in pink, also fly from Kazakhstan to the Volga Delta too, and move even further to the Persian Gulf. Certainly, in the far north at Lake Ladoga, few birds stay for winter. For migratory birds, Russia's vastness is a gift. Nowhere in Europe do they have as much space as here. However, the popular burning of reeds makes life difficult for all birds. And steals their habitat. Hunting is also temporarily permitted in Russia. Nevertheless, the migration south to the bird paradise of the Volga Delta is still less dangerous than in more populated parts of the world. This satellite picture shows the 200-kilometer-wide Volga Delta where the river merges with the Caspian Sea. The blue and green strands of the Volga run in a bizarre way through the dry desert and steppes in the region around Astrakhan, the only city here. Europe's largest river delta has over 1,000 branches. The word vastness seems to have been invented for the delta of the Volga. Whooper swans come here in the autumn and bring their offspring from the Arctic. Like this couple hatched in the summer in the very north of Siberia. Like all Whooper swans, our couple will remain together for life and never leave each other. Pelicans also spend much of the year in the delta. They breed here. From the safe sandbanks, the little ones learn how to fly. But when water freezes in December, pelicans head further south because the ice prevents them from fishing. Flying long distances is not a problem for them. But in the summer, they hover together over the reeds. Even from a higher bird's eye view, there's nothing in sight but beauty. This haven is home to 10 million birds and over 200 species of fish at this time of year. Without man's intervention, the reed forests would overgrow every single channel of the Volga. Of the thousands of branches of the Volga, 80 can be navigated from Astrakhan to the Caspian Sea. Cormorants are hardly disturbed by shipping traffic. The abundance of fish is too tempting. The reed forests offer so many spawning opportunities and so many retreats that the Volga Delta is probably the richest fish region in Europe. However, the rising water level of the Caspian Sea offsets this balance. Therefore, fishing is restricted. Sturgeons, which are coveted for their caviar, can only be fished in limited quotas. Sturgeons migrate upstream to spawn in the Volga. Traps are still full, although not with anything like the splendid 1,000-kilo specimen caught here many years ago at the impressive age of 75. The Volga Paradise is threatened not only by rising water levels, but also by high levels of pollution. After all, 25% of all Russians live upstream along the Volga. Ornithologists of the national park travel regularly by helicopter to count birds. The only way to count the bird's population in this inaccessible delta is from the bird's eye view. Most species, especially the larger migratory birds, withstand heavy metals and pesticides in the water. But biologists are worried about species like the Dalmatian pelican. Fish-eating birds in particular are an important indicator of the environment's health. If their numbers decline, it's an alarm signal. From the Volga Delta, it's only 700 kilometers west to the constantly warm Sochi. The Black Sea coast is at the same latitude as the Côte d'Azur. But the climate here is even subtropical. The yachting harbour is a remnant of the Soviet era, when ideal workers got rewarded with a rest in the Russian Riviera. Palm trees, cypresses and pines. Thanks to the short, mild winters, Sochi can look like Italy. No wonder Russia's president frequently governs the country from Sochi and receives state guests. The beach is getting more crowded. An enormous number of hotel beds have been created since Sochi hosted the Olympic Games. The Winter Games, mind you. The mountains of the Caucasus almost reach the sea here. They shield Sochi from the cold continental climate. Even the first mountain range in the Sochi hinterland rises up to 1,000 meters in the Caucasian National Park. This is where the ski races of the Olympic Games took place. The main ridge of the Caucasus, with its rugged 3,000-meter peaks, is only 30 kilometers from the Riviera. The Caucasus mountain range stretches from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea. The border of Georgia and Russia runs along the Greater Caucasus, just 200 kilometers from Sochi. Elbrus Massif towers over the surrounding 5,000-meter mountain range. Europe's highest mountain looks over a snow-covered world even in mid-August. At 5,642 meters. In summer, mountaineers make their way up to the summit. While 22 glaciers around Elbrus push their way down the valley. Midsummer is the best time to see the glacier borderlines between the rocks. Seen from further away, the Elbrus looks much the same as it was 2,000 years ago, when the volcano last erupted. Back then, both craters scattered ashes and lava over 250 square kilometers. Until a few years ago, scientists still believed that, due to the particularly high quantity of snow in the winter, Turkcell and the other glaciers could withstand the ice melting. But now Russian scientists are raising the alarm. At their lowest point, some glaciers are melting as quickly as those in the Alps. Geologists believe the Elbrus ice sheets have lost an average of 25% of their surface area. But they might have lost even 40 to 60% in thickness in the last 50 years alone. At altitudes around 3,000 meters, this shrinkage is particularly visible. The balance between snowfall in winter and snow melt in summer is maintained only at an altitude above 4,000 meters. If the ice no longer binds the water, this can have devastating effects for mountain regions such as the small Russian Elbrus Republic of Kabardino-Balkaria. These Caucasus climbers, on the contrary, will benefit from less ice and snow. On the steep rock face, high above the Turkcell Winter Sports Resort, these male mountain goats spend the entire summer on a kind of men's field trip. They couldn't care less about the beautiful view. While the females tend to their young, groups of males patrol the upper regions, looking for food. From the west to the southeast, the Caucasus spans 1,100 kilometers. You can feel how south you are in the lower valleys. The narrow valleys are densely forested. In the Caucasus, there are 50 different peoples and almost as many languages. Along the ridges of the mountains, there are borders between cultures, between Europe and the Orient, between Christianity and Islam, between tribes and ethnic groups. And all boundaries here seem vague. Tensions between the different groups have existed for hundreds of years. First, the Romans conquered the Caucasus, then the Persians, then the Ottomans. In the 19th century, Tsarist Russia fought a continuous 50-year war. In the small Caucasus Republic of Ingushetia, there are mysterious towers everywhere. Many of them are reconstructions, partly to attract tourists in this otherwise rather forgotten region. The villages in this mountainous region were subject to frequent attacks by the Mongols, so the Ingushetians began building defensive towers. Every family in every clan had at least one tower of its own that served both for protection and as a tiny castle. In some valleys, the towers were lined up in rows and served as relay stations for important news. Towers also served as places of emergency refuge when there was a conflict between different families in the village. You never know who your enemy might be. In the south of the Caucasus, the landscape becomes drier and more karstified. This is where Dagestan begins. The mountains of Dagestan rise to over 4,000 meters, like a natural wall to Azerbaijan and Persia. Water is precious here in the extreme south of Russia. The Cherky Dam is one of the highest in the world. The mountains in Dagestan are like a mini version of the Caucasus. Even remote villages have their own language. In Dagestan alone, with its 3 million inhabitants, there are 30 languages and 80 dialects. Nowhere in Russia are there as many abandoned villages as in Dagestan. The rural exodus began early in the Soviet Union era. Of course, this doesn't apply to Europe's highest village, Kharush. Some 800 inhabitants live here at an altitude of 2,460 meters. The whole village was disbanded in the early 1950s under the orders of the Soviet dictator Stalin. The people were resettled in neighboring Azerbaijan, which belonged to the Soviet Union back then. At the beginning of the 90s, the Soviet Union was disbanded and the people returned to their homes. The village is home to the Legions, an ethnic group of 400,000 people in Russia who enjoy an autonomous status. Kharush is the southernmost village in Russia. From Kharush, Muslims climb the sacred 4,150 meters of Mount Shelbasdag. This brings money to the village, and so there is no reason to leave the countryside. If you live in the mountains of Dagestan and dream of a better life, then you'll yearn for the coast of the Caspian Sea. Dagestan is considered the poorest of all the Russian republics. Over 50% of the population live below the poverty line. Derbent is one of the places which attracts people. The Narayan Kala fortress is enthroned above the city. city looks like an open-air museum. Derbent is 5,000 years old and is Russia's oldest city, although the walls of the fortress were erected only around the year 600 by the Persians. The city was built much earlier on the narrowest strip of land by the sea. In days of old, trade between Persia and the north had to pass directly through Derbent. That's why everything has always gravitated straight to the sea, where the trade caravans passed by, and with them, money. Derbent's population is still growing and still attracts people from the countryside and tourists. In the north of Dagestan, in a huge nature reserve, lies the Sarıkum Dune. The Sarıkum Dune is the largest and highest dune in Eurasia. At 262 meters, it's 2 to 3 times higher than the much more famous one in Arcachon on the French Atlantic. In summer, the sand dunes heat up to 60 degrees. But in January, temperatures fall well below freezing. Yet the wetlands of the park are habitat to more than 300 animal species, some of which are endangered, and the northernmost liana forest in the world. The north coast of Dagestan belongs to water birds and to fishermen. Chechen is an island with a lighthouse and a fishing village, but nobody lives here permanently anymore. Chechen is notorious for its cold winters when the Caspian Sea, the largest inland sea in the world, freezes for 3 months, and for its stockfish. As with everywhere, cities attract young people, and so does Makhachkala, Dagestan's capital. No Russian republic has more Muslims than Dagestan. 90% of the people here pray in mosques. In the last 50 years, the number of inhabitants of the city quadrupled to almost 600,000, and construction keeps pace. Makhachkala is not a beauty, but the ice-free port generates revenue. By 1896, the town was connected to the railway line from Baku to Rostov-on-Don. Makhatchkala also benefits from the fact that Dagestan's strip of land on the Caspian Sea is a bridge to the Orient, Russia's connection to Persia and the Arab world. It attracts more people to the smart new districts being built. Kalmykia's steppes border on the north with Dagestan. Camels are traditionally useful animals in dry areas. Since the failure of various irrigation programs in the Soviet era, parts of Kalmykia's steppes are now regarded as Europe's first desert. Kalmyks are a Mongolian people who came from Central Asia to the south of Russia about 300 years ago. Their Asian origin is evident in the Buddhist decoration of a holy tree. The center of Elista, the capital of Kalmykia, is dominated by a Buddhist temple. Kalmykia is the only Buddhist region in Europe. Kirsan Ilyumshinov, the colorful self-made billionaire of the Republic, commissioned Elista's temples. The entire Kalmykian people were collectively deported to Siberia by Stalin. After his death in 1957, however, they were permitted to return to their homes. Less than 200,000 Kalmyks live in Russia today. A few hundred kilometers to the west, on the other side of the steppes, iron ore and salt are mined in the city of Stary Oskol, close to the border with Ukraine. The population of Stary Oskol has increased fivefold in the last 50 years. Steelwork and mining attract people. Not far away lies the industrial city of Volgograd on the Volga. The Motherland Calls monument commemorates the Battle of Stalingrad, the former name of the city on the big Russian river. In Volgograd, the Volga-Don Channel branches off from the river, a 100 kilometers waterway. Connected by 13 locks, the canal not only links the two major European rivers in Russia, it also connects the Black Sea, into which the Don finally flows, with the Caspian Sea, into which the Volga flows. Hardly any country uses its waterways to transport goods as much as Russia. Huge tonnages of commodities could hardly be handled otherwise. The Don flows 88 meters higher than the Volga in Volgograd. No wonder the locks create some traffic jams, especially at the last lock, where the canal meets the Don near Volgodonsk. This last congestion is also inevitable at Rostov's dated lift bridge. Rostov is a city of 1 million and the last harbour before the Don flows into the Sea of Azov, a side sea of the Black Sea. The lift bridge, which is at the opposite end of the bold waterway, is in Astrakhan, the old merchant city at the northern end of the Volga Delta, the last stop before the Caspian Sea. Tankers transporting oil from the Caspian Sea are lining up before the lift bridge. This was also an important trade place centuries ago. The essence of the Orient has always drifted over Astrakhan, as has the scent of the nearby deserts and steppes. The exceptionally thick walls of the Kremlin with its 8 towers were not built until the Russians took over the city in the 16th century. Defensive buildings were always necessary against constant attacks by Mongols, Ottomans, and Tatars. Seen from above, it looks like a rigidly geometrical city. But when you have a closer look, you realize this is Astrakhan Cemetery. This is perhaps Russia's largest. The economy was slow in Astrakhan during the Soviet era, but then oil and gas exploration kicked in. Just before the gates of Astrakhan lies a natural gas field with a refinery that, among other things, produces 10% of the world's sulfur supply. As far as the eye can see, the high flares of the natural gas field are burning. By Russian standards, the field is not considered large, yet production is lucrative thanks to hydrogen sulfide, also found here at the depth of 4 kilometers. Nevertheless, the field is, by Russian standards, relatively small. Only 2.5 trillion cubic meters of gas are estimated to be here. The eerie green sulfur is separated from the gas in reactors. From Astrakhan, Russian Mi-8 helicopters thunder regularly over the peaceful Volga Delta. They bring crews to the oil platforms anchored many kilometers off the coast. A group of Hooper swans happens to fly in the same direction. Environmentalists are worried about potential spilling from the platforms, which are so close to one of Europe's most precious nature reserves. But the size of oil resources is too important for the Russian economy to ignore. "125 people live on the platform and work in shifts. They are flown in and out by helicopter. Thus far, there's never been a major incident, but the delta remains a very sensitive ecosystem. Pelicans enjoy the last warm days of November in the Volga Delta. They will soon migrate further south. Pelicans hunt fish in groups. Now they are teaching their offspring to fly in formation and how to shoo the fish into shallower water where they are easy prey. Whooper swans are vegetarian. They are cruising from their roosting sites to their feeding sites and back again. At this time of the year, there are 10 million birds in the Volga Delta. Our Arctic couple will spend the winter here, even though the entire Volga Delta freezes over from December for 3 months. In March, they will migrate back to the Arctic to breed, just as they do year after year.